Okay, let's start. Good afternoon. This is the fourth session in our four-part series, so the last of our summer series, what we call the lunchtime learning uh, sessions. The topic is operational resilience, broad topic, and today we're focusing on third-party risk. Now, if you've seen the others or if you've missed them, they are available as well. They're all recorded. And do give us your feedback at the end of this about this one and about the whole series. We hope you've enjoyed it. Okay, let's have a look. Lots of faces on your side coming back again, so you're very welcome. A couple of new faces on this one. So a quick 30 seconds on us, the company, where like many of you, where we see ourselves as experienced risk and compliance professionals. And we offer a solution, a GRC solution called calQrisk. It's a SaaS-based solution. And our client base is very much your representative of it. It's a lot of people in the financial services space, also public sector and in the educational space. We do have a second product, also in the broad governance space, called Greenfeet. If you want to do comprehensive carbon accounting, do talk to us. And I'm glad to say we continue to receive accolades for our product. And the most recent one was our best solution for operational resilience, a RegTech award. So, end of the sales pitch, I promise you. So, as I said, this is the fourth in the series. And if you've missed the others, certainly check out our YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to talk about third-party risk, and it's a key element in the Indora, but I would say it's a key activity for most organizations these days, because how many of us can operate without a third party? Third parties are extensions of our organization, and you'll see that throughout my presentation. Okay. Again, those of you who know me and know my presentations, I like to have a quote, and this is probably the first time I'm putting in what I'm calling a standard axiom, because many people have said this, including myself. You need to watch your third-party risks. The weakest link in your security or operational chain is almost always a partner that you trust, but you don't control. And I think if I was to put a quote in I put in Regan's, trust is good, but checking is better. Yeah, you need to manage your third parties. And this is something that the regulators over the last couple of years have shown their unhappiness about, that we tend to throw the parcel over the wall and hope that the third party is doing everything they should be doing. So let's have a look. These are concentrated sessions. These are just half-hour sessions. So we're concentrating a lot of information in that half hour. We know you like it. That's why we do it. But I'm not going down into great detail. I will have a lot of words in the slides, and that's so that you can read later. So I'm breaking this into three sections. One is identifying the third parties in the first place, the critical ones in particular, and then the risks. The critical ones, and the reason one does that is because it's I suppose called a risk-based approach, and you focus your energies on the ones that matter most. Then we look at ongoing due diligence. Now I stress ongoing due diligence again from a time point of view. I reckoned that most of you have already appointed most of your third parties, so the initial due diligence would be probably not as useful to most of you today. So we're going to talk about the ongoing due diligence. They're already third parties for several years. What should you be doing? And the key one is business continuity, because we're talking about operational resilience, and things do go wrong. And do you have a plan? And do your third parties have plans to cope with when things go wrong? And at the end, I will leave some time. I'm watching the clock. I will leave 5 or 10 minutes for questions at the end, so that we get you back to your lunch by 1 o'clock. Okay. Many years ago, I was given the task to identify our third parties, and it wasn't for good reasons. It was for actually Chapter 11 or examinership. And I remember getting a list from the from the finance department of all of the people we've ever paid money to, and it was something like 800. It was incredibly long, but it has stuck with me. And I often thought that if you're trying to identify your third parties, rather than starting with a blank sheet, start with that list, and you'd be surprised how many you do have. You think you have maybe 5 or 10, you probably have 30. When we identified the 800, it was a bigger company I was in. But look, I've presented some um, categories here, for want of a better word. Your IT service provider, and you might have IT in-house, but you might be dependent on service providers. It could be an internet service provider who's providing your voice and data connection. That's the telecoms. That's the C in ICT, the communications technology. Your cloud provider. A lot of us now, have cloud providers. A lot of our stuff is in clouds, where previously they used to be in a computer room in the house. It could be your HR software that's in the cloud. Training provider, if you're in the fund or investment management space, think of all your delegates, think of all the third parties that you depend upon. Look, this is, and I'm trying to represent it here with the dots, not an exhaustive list, but more or less a prompt list. And before you identify the critical ones, I would say identify as many as you can. It's a salutary process. It's sobering, I tell you. So yeah, identify them all. And then I would say, before you start picking the critical ones, identify the services you provide. Now, the regulator calls this functions. I prefer to call it a business service that you're providing. And ask yourself, because we're trying to focus on the things that matter here. We're trying to have a risk-based approach and spend our energies on the really important stuff. So if you were providing 20 services, what are the critical ones? And don't tell me that they're all equally critical. It's never the case. Ask yourself some questions. Now, the method that you use to determine the criticality, you have to document that, because the regulator will require you to explain how did you arrive at this list of critical functions. Now, the interesting thing is that DORA and the European Banking Authority focus on the criticality of the service, whereas in the Central Bank of Ireland's outsourcing register, it tends to be focused on the critical third parties. Subtle difference, but I would say, if you do this, identify the critical services, it'll help you identify the critical third parties, almost by default. Not necessarily. So would customers lose access to essential products or services if the service became unavailable? Probably a better question to ask is the percentage. Would a significant percentage, or put a number on it, if you're trying to decide, is this critical, and say, well, would more than 30%, I don't want to put numbers on these, that's for you to decide, but put a percentage number. Would X percent of customers lose access to essential services? And if the answer is yes, then this is critical. It could be the answer to just one of these questions. I put up, 7 here to prompt you with some ideas, but you need to come up with, I'm going to say, maybe 3 questions. I think it can be done in 3 questions. And if the answer to those questions are yes, then you've identified a critical service. Would the regulator be calling you? If that service stopped and your customers are affected and started complaining, would you soon get a call from the regulator? That's a very simple way of asking the question, but the regulator is worried about the consumers. The regulator is there to protect consumers, not you. So yes, if the regulator is calling you, then you probably need to do something. Would you be in breach of a contractual obligation, whether it's and maybe it's a legal obligation? But if you are, then probably it's critical. That's a good question to ask as well. And one for yourself. I mean, the regulator doesn't care about your reputation so much as care about the customers, but you care. And would your reputation be damaged? If you had a disruption to this service and it continued, for longer than 20 minutes, an hour, 24 hours, at what point is your reputation now damaged and I won't say destroyed. Destroyed, you're probably out of business. Would you ask yourself these questions, identify the critical services, and then go back to your third party list? Knowing now which services are critical, you can look at your maybe the list you thought were critical, and maybe look at the whole list and say, okay, what if the disruption was at the third party side? What if they suffered a disruption? Whether it's a fire, a flood, they've gone bankrupt, whatever. It could be short term, could be long term. But a sudden loss of that third party, how does that impact you? You know, um, can it be fixed within 24 hours? Do you know if it can? Have you asked in the past? Have you looked for their business continuity plans? And if they're gone and gone for good, and you have to replace it or bring it in house, can you do that? Are they that critical that you're suffering within 24 hours? If they went, if they had a serious loss, would they attract regulatory scrutiny? Are they so important in the ecosystem? If they have a problem, a disruption, whatever caused, if the regulators told them to cease and desist, does that affect your reputation? And maybe they're not essential today, but maybe you have a key strategic objective that you want to achieve. And you've chosen this third party to join you along this way. And now they're in trouble, whether it's, as I said, a man-made or self-made trouble. Are you in trouble? So you need to ask a few questions. Now, I've put up, you saw the graphic in the previous two slides. I put all this information into ChatGPT and I said, create me a graphic. Again, I'm trying to get a lot of information in one screen, but to give you an idea of the third parties you might be looking at, whether it's a cloud provider, managed IT service provider, payment processor, and you might identify two layers here. You might identify those that are critical and maybe the next tier down, tier two. There's no rule to say you have to have one layer, two layers, or three layers, but I think I would tier them into the criticality, maybe the highest level are the ones you focus on. But I think you need to manage all of your third parties. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay. So now you know what services you provide, you know which ones are critical, you know what third parties you depend upon, and you know which ones are critical. Spend the time to think about the risk. Now, those of you who know me know I've been doing risk now for 20 years plus. And over the years, people have said, which is better, top down or bottom up? My answer is, well, if I had to pick one, it'd be top down, but I think you benefit from doing both. Top down is a structured way of forcing yourself, if you wish, to look for the risks and see if there are risks in particular areas that you identify. Take your ICT security. Security in terms of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So is my internet connection always on? Will it always be on? What happens if I have no internet connection? If it's delivering a critical service, maybe I need a second one. Maybe I need one that comes in wirelessly and one that comes in on copper. But what are the risks in terms of ICT security? What are the operational risks? A service outage, concentration risk. Two elements to that. Have you got a lot of your services dependent on one third party? That's one form of concentration. And if they go, it affects not just one of your services, but multiple. But what if it's a fourth party? And what if you've several third parties there, but they're dependent on the same fourth party? Do you know? And you will see that from the regulators, they're increasingly more interested that you're looking at the supply chain. They don't talk about third parties so much now as the supply chain, which is a more correct way of looking at it, because the supply chain will look at fourth parties and perhaps fifth parties and see where are the single points of failure. I mean, there was a famous one years ago about memory chips and companies who are making computers and whatnot, and had, dual source memory chip supply. But those dual sources were going to Kobe in Japan for their memory chips. And when they suffered a disaster, many companies had no memory chips. So look deep into your supply chain. Financial bankruptcy, well, financial and anything financial, I mean, it could be that a supplier is suffering a shortage of cash and can't hire the people, can't deliver the service you wanted. So maybe it's not a total outage, but maybe it's poor service. You need to be alert to these things. Compliance, compliance with GDPR, you and your third parties. We're focused on third parties here. Are they compliant? Are they regulated? Are they maintaining compliance with their obligations? Money laundering, and we talk about fourth parties. Some of you will know the story of the fourth party in another country that was sanctioned by the regulator for anti-money laundering. And what happened? They were shut down for some time, and the Irish third party that was dependent on them was unable to deliver the service. So think that under geopolitical and not just regional conflicts and weather, but the sanctions. There are many, there are a bunch of risks in there you need to be considering. ESG. Okay, I think I've made the point. Pick a few areas if they're important to you. Drill down and see what are the risks with the third parties you've assembled. Now, the bottom-up approach. I would then go look at each of the critical third parties and say, do we have any specific risks there? Have you found out that you're dependent on one individual, and if that individual is on holidays in the south of Spain when there's a disruption, are you exposed? It could be individuals, it could be limited resources, it could be if they have an outage that this company can't recover as quickly as you require them to. So yeah, do top down and do bottom up, and you get a good set of the risks. Ignorance of the risks and saying, I didn't know, Your Honor, is not an excuse. It's your job to do that. And I would say, and I don't have a slide particularly on this, but governance. Somebody should be, maybe it's on the due diligence one, somebody should be responsible, and maybe you have more than one for each contract. And it could be the same person or it could be multiple people. Speaking of contracts, and you might say, well, we did the contract 3 years ago and, that horse is bolted. No, it hasn't, because you will have renewal dates. You will have opportunities to update the contract. You should have. I remember breaking a 5-year contract with a Swiss company many years ago that was covering 4 countries, and I told them I'm cancelling the contract, but I'm going to send you a new contract. Actually, I'm going to send you 5 contracts. They didn't like it, but sometimes you need a break to reset and get things right, because I've 14 things here that should be in contracts. And again, not an exhaustive list. But take the first one, a clear description of the services. How many of you really believe that the description of the services that you put in on day one of a contract still are valid 6 months later even, or 12 months later, and mine 3 years later? Scope creep. You've been adding stuff to it, and guess what? You haven't changed the contract. Well, you should be. You should be adding addendums at least, and then, occasionally, maybe every couple of years, update the contract to reflect it properly and put in the addendums. Start date, end date, renewal date. Is it just a start date and it's blank? And maybe it's auto renewal, and that's okay, but don't be silent on it. Financial obligations, yours and theirs. Outsourcing. I would say don't be silent on the outsourcing. If you allow it with approval, won't be unreasonably withheld, that sort of thing. But don't be silent on it. Have an opinion. Where will the service be provided? Maybe you say that it has to be provided within the European Union. The data has to stay within the European Union. Or if it's going outside of the European Union, you have to approve wherever it's going. Don't be silent on these things in the contract. Information security requirements. You spend a lot of time and effort making sure your information security is good, expected, and put it in the contract from your suppliers as well. Reporting obligations. You should be getting a report on at least quarterly basis, probably monthly basis. And if there's an incident, you should have that in the contract that you get a report on the incident. Full disclosure, transparency. They're an extension of your organization. Treat them like another department. And there should be that transparency and openness and honesty. Service level agreements. It's a key risk indicator as well. If the service is beginning to drop, then maybe something is going wrong. And if you're not if you're not measuring it, you're not managing it. I think that's a Peter Drucker one. What gets measured gets managed. The regulator would like you to have in the contract a right to audit that you can go and check. Um, business continuity plans, we'll talk about that in a moment. But yes, if your maximum tolerable outage for a service is 4 hours, then you want to make sure that your third party can also recover in less than that, probably 2 hours. Um, insurance cover, if somebody has a severe disruption, building damaged, um, and they don't have insurance and they can't recover quickly, it's a simple thing to have in a contract, but expect certain insurances. It could be cyber insurance, it could be property loss insurance, whatever. I'm not specifying what they should be. Don't be silent on governing law. That's usually in there anyway. And termination rights and exit strategies. Again, exit strategy is one that regulators are interested in because you or the third party might decide to end the relationship. And if you haven't thought about what happens next until that day when one of you makes a decision, then you're already playing catch up, and that's never good. Okay, ongoing due diligence. I thought I'd get through all of these more quickly, but again, I put all my thoughts into ChatGPT and said, create me a graphic because I would have had 3 or 4 slides there. But let me take you quickly through it. Assuming you've done the initial due diligence, I'm not covering that today, but on an ongoing basis, and maybe it's a quarterly one, check the financial health of the organization. And maybe it's only annually. Maybe you don't need to do it quarterly, but are they still, financially sound? The contract, yeah. Have you had scope creep? Have services crept in? Do you need to update the contract? Are you managing that? Are you ensuring that any of those additional things are being signed off by the appropriate people? Data protection. Has there been any breaches? If personal data is involved, you need to keep an eye on that and to make sure that it is getting the protection it deserves. Business continuity we spoke about, and I'll talk about that in more detail in the next slide. Threat intelligence. Interesting. We've been looking at some products recently to include in ours, whereby you get up to the minute threat intelligence if somebody has a cyber breach that you would know it. Incident reporting. Have they had any incidents? Have they reported them to you? Again, as I said, that's mandatory. SLAs we covered, that you're getting maybe a monthly report on the service level. That's I would say an important one that you're getting. Media mentions. This is a bit like the threat intelligence. We've just put this into our solution that if the regulator has issued a warning about a particular company, you'll actually see that in calQrisk. You'll get a media mention, but it's, find out soon if they're in the news, especially if they're in the news for the wrong reasons. And your third party, if they're regulated and if they have to be compliant, well, we all have to be compliant with GDPR. You need to be comfortable and happy and assured that they remain compliant. So look, there's a lot more detail on this slide, but this should give you some prompts for things you should do to do that ongoing monitoring. Now, it sounds like your big brother, but I would see it really, I've put it up here, stronger partnership. The partner that you have regular contact with and open communication is a stronger partner. Okay. Just 2 more slides. On the business continuity and testing, I think this is important from a resilience point of view, because if you do have a disruption or the third party is a disruption, you want to get back up and running as quickly as possible, at least to a continuity state. So where you're delivering the key services, maybe not all of them, but the critical ones. So you need to confirm that your third party has a plan, and you need to confirm that their maximum tolerable outage recovery time objective, recovery point objective is aligned with yours. Because if you're telling the world you can be back in 2 hours and the third party is saying 2 days, then that's a serious misalignment. Business continuity plans won't cover every single scenario. I once read an article years ago saying you're always prepared for the last disaster. But most business continuity plans will have a scenario maybe for a cyber attack. Maybe it's a severe weather event. Maybe it's a utility failure. If you're going to have 4 or 5 top-level scenarios, one of them should be a third party fails in your own business continuity plan. And when you do an exercise, and I do recommend doing exercises, and there can be tabletop exercise. So you sit around a table for 2 hours and you say, what if? And somebody presents a scenario where it's Tuesday night, 11:30, such happens, and you work through it. Involve your third parties in that, especially if they're part of the solution and the fix. And I think that should be in the contract as well, that they must join you in these exercises. But work out the communications, what happens, and don't assume that the disaster will happen at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a weekday. Consider 11:30 on Friday night, and how will you communicate with each other? You can test, restore, and recovery separate to any incident. That's a key one, because particularly because restores often fail, and I'm talking about more than 50%. So good thing to exercise. In any disaster scenario or disruption scenario, people will have roles, should have roles. They should know what they have to do. But some of them will be on holidays. So make sure when you assign roles that you assign an alternate, that there is a second person who doesn't go on holidays at the same time. Okay. And if you do have an incident, treat it as like a learning exercise, learn from it and update your plans. Okay. I'm going to summarize. I know this has been concentrated and I've only left 3 minutes for questions, but treat third parties as an extension of your organization. Draw up a list of those involved in the delivery of the critical services. Draw up a list of the risks associated with each third party. Conduct regular monitoring. Don't leave it once a year. Do some things once a month, once a quarter, once every half year, but do your regular monitoring and measuring. Test your plans. I prefer to call them exercises. Exercise your plans. The more you exercise, the better they get. And document those exercises, not just for the regulator, but if you document the exercises, there will be learnings from those exercises and you can improve the plans. That's it. I've only left a couple of minutes for questions, but I know it was concentrated, but I hope you got something from that. So do talk to me. Go put them in the Q&A if you go into Q&A, and I think I might have one already. I'll just go in and have a quick look. Denise, I'll read it out. It's long. While we would have a detailed checklist used to complete our third-party due diligence, we can do this because we would have contract wordings, SLAs and BCPs, etc., to assess against. Where that third party uses sub-processors, the contract will be between those parties. So how do you think we can go about carrying out the same level of due diligence on the sub-processor? Is it likely that a third party would release their contract wording and SLA with the sub-processors? That's an interesting question. No, I don't think it's likely that they will share their contract with you. But I think in your contract, if you're allowing them to use sub-processors, then you've got to put the conditions in your contract and then get them to answer those questions, if they can confirm for each of the sub-processor. Yeah, I think it's the wording in your contract that probably needs the update. I mean, what is important, if it's a subcontractor that's maybe not critical versus one that is maybe working on sensitive data, and that data is leaving the country and maybe going to a country outside of the EU, you certainly need to know that, and you certainly need the reassurance from your third party, because you're right, your relationship isn't with the fourth party, but ultimately you are responsible for that personal information, for that sensitive information. So I would have it in the contract with the third party. I hope I've answered that, Denise. Okay. Any more? Okay, we have another one. Frank, are checklists the best way to ensure that the employees negotiating contracts review the risks associated with third parties being engaged? Should risk and finance specialists carry out the due diligence? Okay, there's a couple of things in that. The checklists, when I was talking about the risks, I would consider checklists as a form of top-down approach. It's the list that probably applies to everybody. And is it the best way? If it's the only way you're doing, then probably is, as distinct from an ad hoc one. You look at a third party and say, what are the risks? Have a list that would prompt you. Some of them may not be applicable, but I would say also do the the bottom up and look at the third party and consider where they are. If they're in a country that is subject to severe weather, then you're thinking we've got to consider severe weather events. If they're in a country that is next to a country that's at war, maybe you consider regional conflicts. So I would do both and not. So to answer your question, I wouldn't rely solely on a checklist. I would then do for each individual third party, I would look at, are there any other risks that are specific to them? Right. Now, the second part of your question, should risk and finance specialists carry out the due diligence? If risk and finance people know how to ask and understand the answers to information security questions, then yes, I would answer the question by saying that the people doing the due diligence should have the competence, one, to ask the questions that need to be asked, and then two, to understand the answer. So if you're a small organization, it might come down to one or two people. If you're a large organization, then you probably have the luxury of being able to bring in specialists in each area. But don't do like some companies do and bring a sledgehammer to crack a nut. Decide what's important and what questions you need to ask. I've seen many organizations, big organizations, sending out hundreds, and I kid you not, I've seen over 500 questions being asked about a service that, we're talking about 10 or 15 grand here, and you've got 500 questions, so make it proportional and make it, focus on what's important, I would say. So yeah, if it's a small company, I would say one or two people, but the key thing is that they know the questions to ask and they can understand the answers and review the answers. I know we're gone past 1 o'clock. I'm not seeing any more questions, so I might call it at that. Just one last thing to say from me, and that is that whoops, in 2 days' time, on Thursday this week in the afternoon, Julie is going to give a demo of our system, particularly on third-party risk management. So if you're interested, that's on our website. You can register on the website, but that should be good. Just show you how we've implemented some of these things that I've been talking about. And all that remains for me is to say, well, thank you. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you enjoyed the series. Do give us your feedback. We're going to pause now for the summer. And in autumn, I think we're going to start with a few workshops on third parties. So keep an eye out for that. Thank you for attending. Bye-bye.